This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nizzahon, and it's Friday, and it means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. Sometimes I also look at the worst cards that have ever been printed, but today we're not doing either of those things. Today is April Fool's Day, and in honor of that, we're going to do something a little bit wacky today. We're going to take a look at Ante cards. This isn't quite an April Fool's joke, but it is a pretty strange topic. Part of the reason this is strange is that Ante cards have been banned from competitive Magic since official events began back in 1994, and that means I'm not going to be using competitive data to do the rankings in this video. And the other reason it's strange is there aren't even actually 10 Ante cards. There's only 9 of them, so this is really an MTG Top 9. So here's a brief introduction to Ante. Back when Magic began in 1993, there was an option of playing for Ante. Just like it sounds, playing for Ante meant you had to ante up before a game, in the sense that you put a random card from your deck into the ante zone, and whoever won the game won both cards, permanently. Ante cards are cards that let you do things with the ante zone as part of their effect, such as adding cards to the ante zone or exchanging them. Some of them also involve the permanent exchange of 2 cards that weren't already in the ante. This mechanic quickly proved problematic, as it became clear that it was basically gambling, and for a game that was marketed to minors, that was a serious problem. For the most part, it also just wasn't popular. People didn't like adding so much risk to their game of Magic. It was also problematic for competitive Magic tournaments, since you couldn't have people losing cards in their deck like that. So, when the banned and restricted list was born in 1994, all the playing for Ante cards were banned, and all future playing for Ante cards would be banned too. And no new playing for Ante cards were printed after 1995. To this day, Ante cards are some of the very few cards that are entirely banned, not restricted, but banned in Vintage. So, you might be asking, how's he going to do an MTG Top 10 for cards that have never even seen play anywhere because they've been banned since the beginning? And the answer to that is that I'm simply going to evaluate the power level of these cards in a hypothetical world where you are playing for Ante, and I'm going to rank them accordingly. Obviously, that means this is going to be based on my own evaluation of these cards and not on any data. So let's get started with a ranking of all 9 Ante cards. At number 9, I have Demonic Attorney. Obviously, I think this is the worst of the playing for Ante cards because, well, it doesn't do a whole lot. It simply has 2 cards added to the ante, and you have very little control over how it happens. You don't know if your opponent will ante a worthwhile card, and you may actually end up anteing one of your own cards that you really didn't want to. As we'll see, the best ante cards are really the ones that actually do something and give you some degree of control over things, and this doesn't really do either. You go down a card here simply to increase the number of anteed cards, and by casting this in the first place, you're actually decreasing your chances of winning since you just paid 3 mana to not impact the actual game at all. So it's really just a net negative to cast Demonic Attorney. At number 8, I have Dark Pact. It also doesn't do anything to the board, but I like it more than Demonic Attorney because it gives you at least some control over what's going on with the ante zone in the game. If you anteed your Mox Sapphire or some other really valuable card you really don't want in there, you can go ahead and get that card out of the ante with Dark Pact. This still isn't very good though, especially because you then randomly put something else in the ante, and you don't have much control over what it is. Plus, sometimes you'll have a basic land in the ante, and then you really don't feel like casting this at all. At number 7, it is Amulet of Quaz. This is yet another card that doesn't have any real impact on the actual game most of the time, but it is at least something that has a negative effect on your opponent. You can tap it and sacrifice it to make your opponent ante the top card of their library. Now, this card may not be anything special, but there's a chance that it will be. It also gives your opponent the rather funny option of choosing instead to flip a coin that determines the entire outcome of the game. I guess if your opponent knows the top card of their library isn't something they want to risk, they may as well go for the coin flip and give themselves a 50% chance of ending the game in their favor right there, even if it means they do lose the original card that was anteed. You still are doing something here that doesn't impact the game and paying significant mana to do it, so you're decreasing your chances of winning the game most of the time, which decreases the value of making your opponent add to the ante in the first place. And number 6, it's Rebirth. This card actually has a really cool design for an ante card, much more interesting than any of the cards we've seen so far, since it gives you a benefit for the cost of anteing up a card. When Rebirth gets cast, each player decides whether they're willing to ante the top card of their library, and if they are, they get to put their life total back to 20. Now, this is symmetrical, but this is definitely the kind of card that can help you stabilize in your control deck. It still isn't good, mind you, since your opponent can get the same benefit as you for 0 mana, but I can see situations where this makes it so an aggro deck just can't win anymore. At number 5, it is Temerian Fiends. This is a creature, so it certainly has more of an impact on the board than anything we've seen so far. Of course, it's a pretty dismal 3 mana 1/1, but that's still a pretty big improvement. You can also pay 3 black and sacrifice it while targeting an artifact. Your opponent then gets the option of either anteing that card or the top card of their library. If they choose to give you the artifact, they get Temerian Fiends in their graveyard, and you get that artifact in your graveyard, and that exchange is permanent. Usually, they will probably choose the top card, especially if you're targeting something like a Mox, but either way, your opponent is likely going to be taking more of a risk in the game than you are. And yeah, the fact it's a creature is also pretty nice, and it's only 99 cents, and that means it's pretty likely you can get something better in your typical game of Magic. At number 4, I have Bronze Tablet. This artifact costs a ton of mana to cast and activate, but it does actually have a real effect on the board. It can exile a non-token permanent if you pay 4 mana, tap it, and exile it. It also lets you and your opponent permanently exchange ownership of cards, and in this case, you do control how that goes down, since you choose what to go after with the tablet. Now, your opponent can get out of it by paying 10 life, but this still means this card is actually doing something no matter what. So, yeah, it's either a removal spell that permanently gives you one of your opponent's non-token permanents, or it does 10 damage to your opponent. That makes it far more impactful than the cards we've seen so far. At number 3, it's Jeweled Bird. This is by far the easiest to cast on this list, and it fittingly has kind of a minor effect. You can tap it to draw a card and exchange the bird for your card in the ante-zone, and then you put that card in your graveyard. That basically makes this a cantrip that lets you take back something from the ante-zone, and yeah, sometimes it might be a basic land or something, but the fact that this is a cheap cantrip and an artifact does mean it replaces itself while also triggering any artifact payoffs you might have. Also, if there is something in the ante-zone that you can actually get value out of putting into your graveyard, this will feel like a 2-for-1. So this is an ante card that likely increases your chances of winning while also reducing the risk of potentially losing, since you can switch the card out from the ante-zone, and that means you're certainly getting a net benefit from casting Jeweled Bird. At number 2, it is Tempest Ifrit. Like Temerian Fiends, it is a creature, but it has way better stats than the Fiends, especially for when it was printed. A 4-mana 3/3 was perfectly fine back then. So, this adds a very real body to the board, and then comes with some ante-upside. In this case, you can tap it and sacrifice it to take a random card from your opponent's hand and put it into your hand. The Ifrit goes into the graveyard then, and the exchange you make is permanent. Your opponent has the option of paying 10 life to ignore this, of course, but either way, you're getting a hill giant with some real upside. Either they lose a huge chunk of life, or you get to put a card from their hand into your hand, which is basically a 2-for-1, so that's pretty sweet. If you're planning on making an exchange here, make sure you're using your 4th edition of Ifrit, because that increases the chances drastically that you're going to come out ahead there. So yeah, Tempest Ifrit is pretty easily the second best anti-card there is. However, there is one that is better, a whole lot better, and that card is Contract from Below. This is actually an entirely absurd card that would probably just be a staple in any format where ante is used. You pay a single black mana here to discard your hand and ante the top card of your library, and then you draw 7 cards. So, yeah, if you cast this, you're probably not losing, so the downside of having to ante something isn't really a downside at all. This gets even sillier in decks that can get value out of putting cards in the graveyard or discarding cards. There are just many decks that can turn the discard part of this into upside, making the card even more absurd. This is simply one of the most powerful Magic cards ever printed, but because of the whole ante thing, it can't really be played anywhere. So that's my ranking of all 9 ante cards. I hope you enjoyed this departure from the normal kind of content you see in an MTG Top 10. If you did enjoy it, please like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to own any of these Ante cards, you can find direct Card Kingdom links for each of them in the description. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to catch up on the over 450 MTG Top 10s I've already done, you should see the playlist on your screen shortly. Lastly, if you want to go the extra mile in supporting the channel, you can on Patreon. Thanks for watching.